The silence before death has a particular weight to it. In the pre-dawn darkness of Forward Operating Base Razor, Syria, that silence pressed down like a held breath as 180 Navy SEALs prepared for what intelligence called a routine extraction. The kind of mission briefed with confident charts and clean timelines, the kind that never went according to plan. Staff Sergeant Maya "Ghost" Restrepo stood in the shadows of the armory, checking her rifle with movements so fluid they seemed choreographed. Around her, the base hummed with controlled chaos, boots on gravel, weapons being loaded, engines turning over in the vehicle bay. But Maya moved through it all like smoke, unnoticed, underestimated, carrying secrets that would have changed everything if anyone had bothered to look past the intelligence analyst patch on her uniform. The SEALs didn't know her real history. They didn't know about the impossible shots, the classified missions, the call sign that had become legend in sniper schools across 3 continents. To them, she was just another support personnel, quiet, competent enough, but definitely not someone who belonged anywhere near the sharp end of combat operations. They were about to learn how wrong they were, but first they had to walk into hell. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? Maya Restrepo had been at FOB Razor for exactly 6 weeks, and in all that time, most of the operators still thought of her as the Intel Girl. On paper, she was a signals intelligence specialist, the kind of person who sat in air-conditioned rooms, analyzed intercepted communications, and pushed sanitized reports up the chain of command. Her name appeared in briefing slides next to radio frequencies and target coordinates, not in mission rosters or assault teams. To the SEALs, she was the woman who handed them folders full of enemy positions and then disappeared back into the talk while they did the actual fighting. She was support staff, rear echelon, someone who pointed at maps instead of pulling triggers. In person, Maya didn't challenge those assumptions. She was compact, maybe 5'5" in boots, with dark hair kept regulation tight and shoulders that seemed too narrow to carry the weight of a full combat load. She moved through the base with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned early that being overlooked was often safer than being noticed. When she spoke in briefings, her voice stayed low and measured, more think tank than battlefield. She analyzed patterns, identified threats, provided context, but she never volunteered for missions, never pushed to get closer to the action, never challenged the unspoken assumption that her job ended where the wire began. What the SEALs didn't see was the file that had been scrubbed clean 3 different times before it ever reached Syria. Years. Before anyone at Razor knew her name, Maya had gone through a selection process that existed mostly in whispered conversations and redacted after-action reports. The program was so classified that most military personnel had never heard of it, and those who had knew better than to ask questions. The shooters it produced didn't stay in one place long, and their records rarely reflected their true capabilities. Maya had learned early that letting people underestimate her wasn't just tactically sound. It was survival. So here, in this dusty corner of eastern Syria, she let the intelligence analyst label sit on her chest like camouflage. No one questioned why someone with her skill set was assigned to a forward operating base. No one wondered why she always seemed to know exactly where incoming fire was coming from before anyone else heard it. No one asked why her hands never shook during mortar attacks or why she could read terrain features like a topographical map come to life. Commander Jake "Hammer" Morrison watched her with the kind of detached assessment that came from 15 years of special operations and a healthy skepticism about anyone who hadn't proven themselves under fire. Morrison was built like the armored vehicles he rode in, solid, reliable, designed to absorb punishment and keep moving forward. He ran Team Charlie, one of the most experienced SEAL units in the theater, and he believed in things he could verify with his own eyes. A quiet intelligence analyst who spent her days buried in signal intercepts and satellite imagery, didn't register on his threat assessment or his confidence scale. "Intel support," he'd muttered to his team leader, Chief Petty Officer Rick Blade Vasquez, during the previous week's briefing. "Stays in the talk, feeds us updates over comms. That's the extent of her involvement." Lieutenant Commander Alex Viper Chen, the mission commander, saw Maya differently. To him, she was a resource on a spreadsheet, a capability that enhanced his operational picture. Chen was young for his rank, sharp jawline, crisp uniform, the kind of officer who could quote doctrine verbatim and believed that proper planning prevented poor performance. When Maya spoke during mission briefs, he listened politely, incorporated her intelligence into his decision matrix, and then focused on the variables he could control: routes, timing, contingencies. Her assessment that enemy activity had been unusually quiet in their target sector was noted, filed, and weighed against signals intelligence that showed minimal radio chatter. "Area's been cold for 2 weeks," he'd told Morrison that morning, tapping the mission folder with a tactical pen. Restrepo's analysis matches battalion's assessment. Minimal resistance expected. Petty Officer First Class. Danny Brick Kowalski didn't bother with nuance or analysis. He was the kind of SEAL who filled uncomfortable silences with dark humor, built like a linebacker with a grin that could cut glass when he smelled weakness. Maya's quiet demeanor, her analytical approach, her tendency to listen more than she talked, all of it invited commentary. He'd already started calling her Professor behind her back, a nickname that had spread through his squad with the casual cruelty that young operators use to establish pecking orders. "Probably hasn't fired her rifle outside of qualification," he'd joked during the evening briefing, watching Maya review her notes in the corner of the tent. "Carries it so the photos look authentic." But Chief Vasquez had caught something the others missed. Rick Vasquez had been running point for SEAL teams longer than most of the men under his command had been in the Navy. He noticed details that others overlooked, patterns that revealed themselves only to someone who had survived by paying attention to things that didn't quite fit. He'd watched Maya during the mortar attack 2 weeks prior, the way her eyes tracked the incoming rounds not with fear but with calculation, reading trajectory and impact patterns like she was solving a math problem. He'd noticed how she moved during base alerts, not rushing like someone panicked, but flowing like someone who knew exactly where threats would develop and how long she had to reach cover. Most telling, he'd seen her hands during the chaos. While other support personnel fumbled with equipment or froze in indecision, Maya's movements stayed smooth, controlled, automatic. Her fingers had tapped a slow, precise rhythm against her thigh, a counting pattern that looked very much like breathing cycles and wind calculations. To most people, it was a nervous habit. To someone who had spent time around the military's most elite shooters, it was muscle memory from a very different kind of training than signals analysis. Despite the doubts and whispered assumptions, Maya moved through her days with a steady professionalism that never drew the wrong kind of attention. She arrived early, stayed late, and treated every piece of intelligence with the kind of methodical care that kept people alive in places like Syria. 3 days before the mission that would change everything, she'd noticed something in the intercepted radio traffic that made her stomach tighten with an old, familiar dread. The chatter wasn't random. The frequency changes weren't arbitrary. Someone was coordinating movements with the kind of disciplined communication protocol she'd seen before in places where ambushes were planned by people who knew how to kill Americans. She'd flagged it in her report, highlighted it in the briefing slides, mentioned it during the intelligence update. But the warning had been buried under more urgent concerns: logistics, weather, timing. Her quiet voice suggesting they reassess enemy capabilities in the target area had been noted and filed away. Now, as the SEALs loaded into vehicles for what command had labeled a straightforward extraction mission, Maya stood in the armory, running her fingers along the worn stock of a rifle that looked standard issue but carried modifications that would have raised questions if anyone had looked closely enough. She checked her ammunition, not the standard load for an intelligence analyst, but the precise count of someone who knew exactly how many rounds it took to change the course of a battle. She secured her rangefinder, adjusted her scope, and slipped into her gear with the fluid efficiency of someone who had done this countless times in places that didn't officially exist. Through the window, she could see the convoy forming up in the pre-dawn darkness, engines rumbling, headlights cutting through the dust, 180 of the Navy's most elite operators, preparing to roll into a valley that felt wrong in ways she couldn't adequately express in an intelligence report. Maya closed her rifle case, slung it over her shoulder, and walked toward the vehicles with the same quiet professionalism she'd shown for 6 weeks. But tonight was different. Tonight, every instinct she'd developed over years of training and combat whispered that the mission briefing had missed something crucial. Tonight, she would have to decide whether to stay quiet and let the system run its course or break every protocol she'd been ordered to follow. The convoy engines grew louder. Time was running out, and in the pre-dawn darkness of Syria, Maya Ghost Restrepo prepared to become someone the SEALs had never expected her to be. The valley opened like a mouthful of teeth. Jagged ridgelines rose on three sides, creating a natural funnel that channeled the convoy deeper into terrain that made Maya's pulse quicken with recognition. She sat in the intelligence vehicle, watching the landscape through reinforced glass, her fingers unconsciously tapping that familiar rhythm against her thigh. The radio chatter from the lead elements was confident, routine. 180 SEALs moving through what command had assured them was a cold zone. Maya knew better. The silence was too complete, too organized. In her earpiece, she could hear the convoy commanders coordinating movement with the casual efficiency of men who believed their own intelligence reports. But through the window, she saw shadows that didn't move with the wind, glints of metal where there should be only rock, and the subtle disturbances in dust patterns that spoke of recent human activity. "Command, this is Ghost," she said quietly into her comm, using her intelligence call sign. "Recommend immediate halt. Pattern recognition suggests—" "Negative, Ghost," came the reply from Lieutenant Commander Chen. "Timeline is tight. We push through." Morrison's voice cut in from the lead vehicle, professional but dismissive. "Intel, stay off the command net unless you have verified threats." Maya's jaw tightened. She had verified threats, her instincts, her training, her years of experience reading battlefields that officially didn't exist. But none of that translated into the kind of hard intelligence that would stop a convoy of 180 special operators. The valley narrowed further. The convoy slowed to navigate switchbacks that forced the vehicles into single file. Maya pressed her face closer to the window, scanning the ridgelines with eyes trained to see what others missed. There, a flash of movement on the northern slope, too quick for wildlife, too purposeful for falling rocks. "Command, we have movement on the high ground, northern ridge approximately." The world exploded. The first RPG slammed into the lead vehicle with a sound like thunder-splitting stone. The MRAP lurched sideways, flames erupting from its engine compartment as the driver fought to maintain control. Before anyone could process what was happening, machine gun fire erupted from three different directions, north, east, and south, creating a perfect triangle of death that trapped the entire convoy in the valley's narrowest point. Maya's vehicle shook as bullets hammered its armored hull. Through the reinforced glass, she watched muzzle flashes bloom like deadly flowers along the ridgelines. The radio net exploded with voices. "Contact left! Contact left! RPG teams on the high ground! We're taking fire from multiple positions! Vehicle 1 is burning! We need immediate extraction!" Chen's voice, no longer confident, cracked through the chaos. "All stations, find cover! Return fire! Someone get eyes on those RPG teams!" Maya was already moving. While the SEALs around her ducked instinctively and reached for their weapons, she grabbed her rifle case and kicked open the rear door of the intelligence vehicle. The sound that rushed in was overwhelming. The sharp crack of AK-47s, the deeper boom of machine guns, the whistle of incoming mortars mixing with the screams of wounded men, and the roar of burning vehicles. "Restrepo!" Morrison's voice boomed over the radio. "Stay in the vehicle! That's an order!" But Maya was already sprinting across open ground, her rifle case bouncing against her back as she ran toward a rocky outcrop that would give her elevation and a clear line of sight to the enemy positions. Bullets kicked up dirt around her boots, but she moved with the fluid grace of someone who had trained to run through fire, not away from it. Chief Vasquez, taking cover behind a disabled vehicle, watched her sprint through the kill zone with growing disbelief. "What the hell is she doing?" he shouted to his team. "Intel doesn't run toward the guns." Maya reached the outcrop and immediately began climbing, her movements economical and precise. She found a fighting position between two boulders that provided cover from most angles while giving her clear fields of fire across the valley. Only then did she open her rifle case, revealing a weapon that looked nothing like standard-issue equipment. The rifle was longer, heavier, with modifications that spoke of specialized training and specific purposes. Maya assembled it, with movements so smooth they seemed choreographed, each component sliding into place with the mechanical precision of someone who could do this blindfolded, under fire, with shaking hands. Through her scope, the chaos below organized itself into a tactical picture she could read like a map. Enemy positions revealed themselves in muzzle flashes and movement patterns. She identified the machine gun nests first, 3 of them, positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that turned the valley floor into a killing field. Maya's breathing slowed. Her pulse dropped. The sounds of battle faded into background noise as her world narrowed to the precise calculations of distance, wind, elevation, and target movement. Her first shot took the northern machine gunner in the center of his chest. He dropped behind his weapon so suddenly that his spotter spent 3 precious seconds looking around in confusion before realizing what had happened. Her second shot silenced the eastern position. The gunner simply ceased to exist, his weapon falling silent as his body crumpled. Maya was already acquiring her third target when the radio net began to change tone. "Someone's hitting the machine gun nests. Where's that fire coming from? Those aren't our positions." Down in the valley, SEALs huddled behind burning vehicles began to notice that the withering fire that had pinned them was becoming sporadic, disorganized. Enemy positions that had been pouring automatic fire into their ranks were going silent one by one. Morrison, pressed against the twisted metal of his vehicle, keyed his radio with shaking hands. "Who has eyes on the shooter? Where are those shots coming from?" Vasquez had been watching Maya's position through the smoke. He saw the muzzle flashes from her outcrop, saw the precise timing of her shots, saw the way enemy positions died exactly when she fired. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "That's Restrepo," he said, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "The intel analyst is the one taking those shots." "Negative," Morrison replied immediately. "That can't be right. Analysts don't—" His words were cut off as Maya's rifle cracked again. An RPG team that had been positioning to finish off the convoy's remaining vehicles suddenly collapsed, their launchers spinning harmlessly into the dirt. The shot had been taken at nearly 400 meters through swirling smoke, with a crosswind that would have challenged Olympic marksmen. "That was a 400-meter shot," Kowalski whispered, his usual swagger completely absent. "In combat conditions, how is she making those shots?" If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Maya had been firing for less than 10 minutes, but the battlefield had already transformed. What had been a perfectly executed ambush designed to annihilate 180 SEALs was now a confused, degraded engagement where enemy fighters found themselves isolated and vulnerable instead of protected by overwhelming firepower. Through her scope, Maya tracked the remaining threats with the methodical precision of someone hunting rather than fighting. Each shot was calculated not just for immediate effect, but for maximum disruption of enemy coordination. She targeted spotters before gunners, radio operators before riflemen, leaders before followers. The enemy had expected to face traditional SEAL tactics, fire and movement, coordinated assaults, overwhelming violence of action. They hadn't expected to face a single sniper who could read their positions like a tactical manual and dismantle their ambush one precise shot at a time. Chief Vasquez was the first to put the pieces together completely. He had been watching Maya's position intently, timing her shots against the elimination of enemy threats. What he saw defied everything he thought he knew about intelligence analysts and support personnel. Maya wasn't just making impossible shots, she was making them in a sequence that demonstrated tactical awareness beyond anything taught in basic marksmanship courses. She was reading the entire battlefield, identifying not just targets, but target priorities, and engaging them in an order that maximized the survival chances of the SEALs below. "Morrison," Vasquez called over the radio, his voice tight with realization, "we need to talk about Restrepo." "Not now, Chief," Morrison replied, still focused on coordinating the defense. "We can debrief intel support after we get out of this kill zone." "Sir," Vasquez insisted, "she's not intel support. Look at her shooting pattern. Look at her target selection. That's advanced sniper doctrine. That's someone with specialized training. As if to emphasize his point, Maya's rifle cracked again. An enemy radio operator, partially concealed behind a boulder 350 meters away, jerked backward and went still. The shot had required her to calculate not just distance and wind, but the precise angle needed to thread the bullet through a gap in the rocks that most shooters wouldn't even have attempted. Petty Officer Kowalski, who had spent weeks mocking Maya's competence, stared at the enemy position with his mouth open. "She threaded that shot through maybe 6 inches of clearance," he whispered. "At 350, in a firefight, who the hell is she?" The question was beginning to spread through the SEAL teams with the speed of combat revelation. Men who had dismissed Maya as another support technician were now watching her single-handedly turn the tide of a battle that should have killed all of them. Lieutenant Commander Chen, still coordinating the evacuation of wounded, found himself repeatedly looking up at Maya's position with growing confusion and something that might have been respect. Every time enemy fire intensified enough to threaten the evacuation, her rifle would crack and another threat would disappear. "Command," he said into his radio, "request immediate identification of friendly sniper. We have an unknown shooter providing precision overwatch." The response came back confused and delayed. "No friendly sniper teams in your area. All support elements are accounted for." Chen stared at his radio, then up at the rocky outcrop where Maya continued her methodical destruction of enemy positions. "Then who the hell is that?" Maya heard the radio chatter through her earpiece, but her focus never wavered from the scope. She had identified 17 distinct enemy positions when the ambush began. 14 were now silent. The remaining 3 were attempting to coordinate a withdrawal, but they were moving predictably, following terrain features that channeled them through areas she could cover. Her next shot took a spotter who was trying to call in mortar fire on the convoy's position. The man had been nearly 400 meters away, partially concealed, moving between cover points. Maya had led him like a bird in flight, calculating his speed and direction, placing her shot where he would be rather than where he was. The bullet found him mid-stride. He dropped so suddenly that his companion spent several seconds calling his name before realizing he was dead. Down in the valley, the SEALs had stopped taking casualties. The murderous crossfire that had trapped them was now reduced to sporadic rifle fire from positions too distant to be immediately dangerous. For the first time since the ambush began, men were able to move without drawing instantly lethal fire. Morrison finally allowed himself to look up at Maya's position, really look at it, with the kind of tactical assessment he should have made weeks ago. What he saw forced him to confront a reality that challenged everything he thought he knew about the woman who had been quietly analyzing intelligence in their briefing tent. She wasn't hiding behind her boulder. She was using it as a precision shooting rest. She wasn't firing randomly at enemy positions. She was engaging them with a systematic approach that spoke of extensive training and combat experience. Most telling, she wasn't showing any signs of the stress or adrenaline that affected even experienced operators during their first major firefight. Maya moved like someone who had done this before, many times. "Chief," Morrison called to Vasquez, his voice carrying a new tone of respect and confusion. "What do we actually know about Restrepo's background?" Vasquez was quiet for a moment, thinking back through weeks of casual observations that were suddenly taking on new meaning. "Sir," he said slowly, "I think we know a lot less than we thought we did." Maya's rifle spoke again. The last enemy machine gun position, which had been trying to establish a new field of fire, went silent as its gunner slumped over his weapon. The valley, which had been a chaos of gunfire and explosions 15 minutes earlier, now held only the sound of wind through the rocks and the low voices of SEALs calling out status reports. But Maya didn't lower her rifle. Through her scope, she could see movement on the distant ridgeline, reinforcements moving to support the ambush, or perhaps a second team positioning for another attack. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. And for the first time since arriving at Avob Razor, Maya Ghost Restrepo was about to show 180 Navy SEALs exactly who she really was. The silence stretched across the valley like a held breath, broken only by the crackling of burning vehicles and the low murmur of SEALs checking casualties. Maya remained in her position, rifle trained on the ridgelines, reading the terrain with eyes that had seen this pattern before. The lull before the second wave, the pause that meant someone was coordinating a more serious response. Through her scope, she tracked movement on the northern slope, not the disorganized retreat of a broken ambush, but the deliberate positioning of a follow-up force, professional, coordinated, dangerous. "Contact incoming," Maya said into her comm, her voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there during intelligence briefings. "Northern Ridge, approximately 40 personnel. They're setting up for a secondary ambush." Morrison, still processing the impossibility of what he had witnessed, keyed his radio with hesitation. "Restrepo, how can you verify numbers at that distance?" Maya's response was immediate and precise. "Muzzle flash patterns during movement, dust signature from footfalls, spacing intervals between positions. Estimate 2 full squads with crew-served weapons." The casual expertise in her voice stopped Morrison cold. Those weren't observations an intelligence analyst would make. They were the kind of real-time battlefield assessments that came from advanced reconnaissance training and extensive combat experience. Chief Vasquez was already moving toward Maya's position, scrambling up the rocky slope with the urgency of someone who needed answers immediately. Behind him, Kowalski and 2 other SEALs followed, their weapons ready, but their expressions filled with a confusion that bordered on awe. When Vasquez reached Maya's fighting position, what he saw confirmed every suspicion that had been building in his mind for weeks. Her rifle wasn't just modified. It was a precision instrument that belonged to someone operating at the highest levels of military marksmanship. Her shooting position was textbook perfect, her breathing controlled, her movements economical and professional. But it was her range book that made everything clear. The small, weathered notebook lay open beside her, filled with handwritten entries that documented wind speeds, temperature variations, elevation adjustments, and target data with the meticulous precision of someone who understood that tiny details meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Vasquez picked up the book with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear but from recognition. He had seen range books like this before, during joint training exercises with units that didn't officially exist. The calculations were beyond anything taught in standard military training. The terminology was specific to advanced sniper programs that most operators never even heard about. But it was the call sign written on the inside cover that made his blood run cold. Ghost, Maya Restrepo, Class 07 Alpha. "Jesus Christ," Vasquez whispered. Maya glanced at him briefly, noting his expression, but her attention immediately returned to her scope. "Chief, I need you to relay coordinates to Morrison. The secondary team is positioning crew-served weapons. We have maybe 3 minutes before they open up." "Ghost," Vasquez said, his voice filled with a mixture of respect and disbelief. "You're Ghost." Maya's finger paused on her trigger. For a moment, her carefully maintained cover wavered. The name she had buried, the identity she had hidden for years, the legend that existed mostly in whispered conversations among elite operators. It was all there in Vasquez's voice. "That was a long time ago," she said quietly. "Not that long," Vasquez replied, staring at her with something approaching reverence. "We studied your shots at advanced course, the Kandahar incident, the 12 consecutive hits at over 800 meters, the time you held off an entire Taliban company for 6 hours until QRF arrived." Maya's jaw tightened. Those weren't stories she wanted to remember, missions she hadn't discussed with anyone, operations that existed only in classified files that most people would never see. "Chief," she said, "we can discuss ancient history later. Right now, I need you to—" The northern ridge erupted in muzzle flashes. The second ambush was more sophisticated than the first. Instead of the scattered automatic fire that had characterized the initial attack, this assault began with coordinated mortar fire, followed by disciplined bursts from multiple machine gun positions. The enemy had learned from watching Maya dismantle their first attempt. They were targeting her position specifically while laying down suppressing fire that would prevent the SEALs from maneuvering. Maya didn't flinch as rounds sparked off the rocks around her. She simply shifted her position slightly, finding a new angle that gave her clear lines of sight to the most dangerous threats. "Vasquez, get down and relay to Morrison," she said, her voice calm despite the bullets whining overhead. "Tell him to start the evacuation. I'll cover the withdrawal." "Ma'am," Vasquez said, using the honorific for the first time since meeting her. There are too many of them. Even you can't. Maya's rifle cracked. A mortar team that had been preparing to drop rounds directly onto the convoy's position suddenly lost their gunner. The mortar tube tilted skyward, useless. I held off a company for 6 hours, Maya said, acquiring her next target. This is only 2 squads. Her second shot silenced a machine gun nest that had been zeroing in on the evacuation route. The gunner dropped so suddenly that his assistant spent crucial seconds trying to understand what had happened. Down in the valley, Morrison watched the impossible unfold. The woman he had dismissed as support personnel was engaging multiple enemy positions with a speed and accuracy that defied rational explanation. She wasn't just making difficult shots, she was making them faster than should have been humanly possible while under direct fire. "Command," Morrison said into his radio, his voice filled with awe. "We have confirmed sniper overwatch. Request immediate identification of Ghost." The pause that followed was longer than usual. When the response came, it carried a weight that made Morrison's hands shake. "Classification level prohibits discussion over unsecured channels. Evacuate to safe location for debrief." Morrison stared at his radio, then up at Maya's position, where she continued her methodical destruction of enemy positions. Whatever Maya Ghost Restrepo's real story was, it was classified at levels that made even special operations commanders uncomfortable. Maya fired again. Another enemy position went silent, and for the first time since the ambush began, Morrison understood that the quiet intelligence analyst who had sat in their briefings for 6 weeks wasn't just saving their lives. She was someone whose very presence at FOB Razor represented secrets that went far beyond anything he had clearance to know. The evacuation began under the cover of precision fire from a woman who officially didn't exist. The evacuation moved like clockwork under Maya's protective fire. Vehicle by vehicle, the SEALs pulled back from the kill zone, while she systematically eliminated every threat that tried to interfere with their withdrawal. Her rifle had become a guardian angel's voice, speaking death to anyone who dared target the men under her protection. But it was the precision that stunned them more than the lethality. Maya wasn't just shooting enemy combatants, she was conducting a symphony of tactical dominance. Each shot was timed to maximum effect, targeting not just individuals, but disrupting entire enemy formations. She eliminated radio operators to break communication, spotters to blind mortar teams, and squad leaders to create chaos in enemy ranks. The SEALs had never seen anything like it. Chief Vasquez remained in position beside her, partly to coordinate with the evacuation teams below, and partly because he couldn't bring himself to leave. He was watching a legend work, seeing skills that existed mostly in classified training manuals and whispered stories from operations that officially never happened. "Ghost 6, this is Blade," Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, using Maya's call sign for the first time. "Evacuation, 70% complete. Can you maintain overwatch?" Maya's response came between shots, her voice steady despite the sustained combat. "Affirmative. Have eyes on remaining threats. Continue evacuation." Her rifle cracked again. An enemy sniper who had been trying to target the evacuation route from a concealed position 800 meters away jerked backward and went still. The shot had been taken through swirling dust and heat shimmer, requiring calculations that would have challenged Olympic marksmen in perfect conditions. Down in the valley, Lieutenant Commander Chen stood beside his vehicle, watching Maya's position through binoculars with an expression that mixed awe with something approaching fear. 800 meters, he whispered to his radio operator. She just made an 800-meter shot in combat conditions while taking fire. The radio operator, a veteran of multiple deployments, looked up at Maya's ridge with new eyes. "Sir, who exactly is she?" Chen lowered his binoculars slowly. "I don't think any of us knew." The last vehicles began their withdrawal as Maya shifted to her final firing position. The enemy, recognizing that their ambush had become a massacre, were attempting their own retreat. But Maya wasn't finished with them yet. Her next 3 shots came in rapid succession. Boom, boom, boom! Each one finding an enemy fighter trying to escape up the far ridge. The precision was surgical, the timing perfect, the effect devastating on enemy morale. "Jesus," Kowalski breathed, watching through his scope. She's not just hitting them, she's hunting them. When the last SEAL vehicle cleared the immediate danger zone, Maya finally allowed herself to breathe. She had been shooting for nearly 45 minutes straight, under constant enemy fire, engaging targets at ranges that most snipers wouldn't attempt in training conditions. Her shoulder ached from rifle recoil, her eyes burned from scope strain, and her hands trembled slightly from sustained adrenaline. But 180 SEALs were alive. Maya collapsed her rifle with practiced efficiency, securing it in its case while scanning the ridgelines one final time. The battle was over. The ambush that should have annihilated an entire SEAL task force had been turned into a rout by a woman they had dismissed as support personnel. Chief Vasquez helped her down from the rocky outcrop, his movements carrying a deference that hadn't been there 6 weeks earlier. When they reached the valley floor, the entire convoy had formed into a defensive perimeter around the extraction point, but something was different about the formation. As Maya walked across the dusty ground, her rifle case slung over her shoulder, the SEALs began to notice her approach. One by one, they turned to watch her pass. No one spoke. No one called out. They simply stood at attention with a respect that needed no words. Morrison was the first to salute. The veteran team commander, who had dismissed Maya as intel, support for weeks, stepped forward and brought his hand to his forehead with a precision that spoke of profound gratitude. His salute held for long seconds, a gesture that carried the weight of 180 lives saved and assumptions shattered. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "it has been an honor." Maya returned the salute with equal precision, her expression unreadable. "Just doing my job, Commander." But Morrison shook his head slowly. "No, ma'am, what you did today, that wasn't a job. That was something else entirely." Behind Morrison, Chief Vasquez stepped forward and saluted as well. Then Kowalski, his usual swagger completely absent, joined them. One by one, the entire SEAL task force came to attention, hands rising in salutes that carried more meaning than any ceremony could provide. The sound was overwhelming. 180 sets of boots snapping together in perfect unison, 180 hands rising with identical precision, 180 voices joining in a silence so profound it seemed to echo off the surrounding mountains. Maya stood in the center of it all, small and quiet as she had always been, but now revealed as something extraordinary. The intelligence analyst was gone. In her place stood Ghost, a legend that most of them had heard whispered in training facilities, a name associated with impossible shots in classified operations. Lieutenant Commander Chen approached last, his own salute sharp and respectful. "Ma'am, permission to speak freely?" Maya nodded. "We owe you an apology," Chen said, his voice carrying the humility of someone who had learned a profound lesson. "And we owe you our lives. Both debts are ones we can never fully repay." Maya's response was characteristic of everything the SEALs had learned about her that day. "No apology necessary, sir. You didn't know. That was intentional." The helicopter landing zone was organized chaos. Medics treating wounded, intelligence officers debriefing team leaders, mechanics checking vehicles for battle damage. But underneath the standard post-mission activity, a different kind of processing was taking place. Word was spreading through the task force about what had really happened in the valley, about who Maya Ghost Restrepo actually was, about the legend that had been hiding in plain sight among them for 6 weeks. Colonel Marcus Iron Rodriguez, the task force commander, arrived on the second wave of helicopters with the expression that mixed urgency with something approaching apprehension. Rodriguez was a Marine Corps legend in his own right, a man who had built his reputation on understanding exactly who was under his command and what they were capable of achieving. The fact that he had been operating with incomplete information about one of his personnel was a failure that bothered him more than enemy contact. When Rodriguez spotted Maya sitting alone near the medical tents, cleaning her rifle with the methodical care of someone performing a sacred ritual, he approached with steps that carried the weight of command responsibility. His aide, a young captain, trailed behind with a tablet full of classified files that had arrived via encrypted transmission during the flight. "Staff Sergeant Restrepo," Rodriguez said, his voice carrying formal authority. Maya looked up from her weapon, meeting his gaze with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout her time at FOB Razor. "Sir," Rodriguez studied her face, looking for something that would explain how a woman with her capabilities had ended up assigned to routine intelligence work at a forward operating base. What he saw was competence, experience, and a quietness that suggested she had learned the value of remaining unnoticed. "We need to talk," Rodriguez said, privately. They walked away from the activity of the landing zone to a position that offered both security and privacy. Rodriguez waited until they were alone before speaking again, and when he did, his voice carried a different tone, less command authority, more professional respect. "Your file," he said, "doesn't match what happened today." Maya's expression didn't change. "Files rarely tell the whole story, sir." Rodriguez opened the tablet his aide had provided, scrolling through pages of information that had been classified far above his normal clearance level. What he found there forced him to confront the reality that Maya Ghost Restrepo represented capabilities he hadn't known existed within his command structure. 47 confirmed kills during Operation Silent Thunder, he read quietly. Longest recorded shot 1,247 meters under combat conditions, Presidential Unit Citation, Navy Cross, Purple Heart with 2 clusters. He looked up at Maya. "This file shows you as one of the most decorated snipers in military history." Maya's response was characteristically understated. "I served where needed, sir." "And then you disappeared," Rodriguez continued. "No explanation, no transfer orders, no official reassignment. You just vanished from the system, until you showed up here as an intelligence analyst with a security clearance that should have raised immediate questions." Maya was quiet for a moment, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains where she had spent the morning saving 180 lives. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that spoke of decisions made in classified rooms by people whose names never appeared in public records. "Sometimes the best way to serve is to step back from the spotlight, sir. Sometimes being forgotten is more valuable than being remembered." Rodriguez closed the tablet slowly, processing the implications of what Maya had just told him. The woman sitting beside him represented the kind of strategic asset that nations spent fortunes developing and decades protecting. Her presence at FOB Razor wasn't an administrative accident. It was a deliberate decision made at levels of government he couldn't access. "How many people know?" he asked. "Until today, 3 people in this theater. Now," Maya glanced toward the landing zone where SEALs were still discussing what they had witnessed. "Now it's considerably more." Rodriguez followed her gaze, understanding immediately that Maya's cover was permanently blown. The woman who had operated in shadows for years was now the subject of stories that would spread through special operations communities worldwide. Her days of anonymous service were over. "I'm sorry," he said, and the apology carried genuine regret. "I should have known, should have been briefed, should have protected your operational security better." Maya turned to look at him directly, and for the first time since he had known her, she showed something that might have been a smile. "Sir, what happened today needed to happen. Those men needed to survive. The mission succeeded. Everything else is secondary." Rodriguez stared at her, recognizing in her words the kind of perspective that came from years of making hard decisions in impossible situations. Maya, Ghost Restrepo, wasn't concerned about blown cover or compromised operations. She was focused on the same thing she had always been focused on: keeping people alive. "What happens now?" Rodriguez asked. Maya stood shouldering her rifle case with movements that carried the same quiet efficiency she had shown for 6 weeks. "Now I go back to doing whatever job needs doing, sir. Same as always." But Rodriguez shook his head slowly. "Not anymore. After today, after what those men witnessed, you can't go back to being invisible." Maya looked across the landing zone one more time, watching the SEALs who had saluted her with such profound respect. They would carry her story with them to every assignment, every deployment, every operation for the rest of their careers. The legend of Ghost would spread through channels both official and unofficial, until it became the kind of story that shaped how special operators understood courage, competence, and quiet professionalism. "Maybe that's not entirely a bad thing," she said quietly. 3 weeks after the ambush in Syria, forward operating base Razor had developed a different rhythm. The changes were subtle but profound, visible in the way personnel moved through their duties, the tone of briefings, and the respect that flowed through conversations about intelligence support and operational planning. Maya still worked in the TOC, still analyzed communications intercepts and satellite imagery, still provided intelligence briefings to mission commanders. But the dynamics had fundamentally shifted in ways that went far beyond her blown cover. The SEALs no longer saw her as support personnel. They saw her as a force multiplier, a strategic asset whose insights carried the weight of proven experience. When Maya suggested that enemy communications patterns indicated potential ambush sites, mission planners listened with attention that bordered on reverence. Commander Morrison approached her recommendations with the same care he devoted to input from his most trusted team leaders. Lieutenant Commander Chen incorporated her tactical assessments directly into operational planning, understanding that her ability to read battlefield patterns could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. Even Kowalski, who had spent weeks mocking her competence, now sought her advice on advanced marksmanship techniques with the humility of someone who had learned a profound lesson about assumptions and respect. But the most significant change was in Maya herself. For years, she'd carried the burden of remaining invisible, of suppressing capabilities that could save lives in order to maintain operational security. The woman who had earned a Navy Cross and Presidential Unit citation had been forced to watch other operators struggle with challenges she could solve easily. Now, for the first time in years, Maya could use her full range of skills without concealment. She could share tactical knowledge that had been classified above the clearance level of most personnel. She could train snipers who had been operating with incomplete understanding of advanced techniques. She could be Ghost again, openly and completely. The transformation was evident in her posture, her voice, her willingness to engage with operational planning at levels she had been forced to avoid. Maya still carried herself with the same quiet professionalism, but there was an energy there that hadn't existed before, the satisfaction of someone finally able to serve at their full potential. Chief Vasquez had become her unofficial liaison with the SEAL teams, coordinating training sessions where Maya shared techniques that most operators had only read about in classified manuals. Her classes on wind reading, target prioritization, and long-range engagement drew participants from across the base. "She's teaching us things they don't cover in sniper school," Vasquez explained to a visiting colonel from Task Force Operations. "Advanced techniques from programs that most of us don't even have clearance to know about." The visiting colonel reviewed Maya's training curriculum with expressions that mixed professional interest with security concerns. "How much of this material is classified?" "All of it," Vasquez replied, "but she's been cleared to share it within the special operations community. Apparently, there are people at very high levels who decided her knowledge is too valuable to keep completely compartmentalized." Maya's influence extended beyond formal training sessions. Her approach to intelligence analysis, combining signals intelligence with tactical intuition, had become a model for other analysts in the theater. Her ability to identify patterns that traditional analysis missed was saving lives on operations across the region. The ripple effects reached far beyond FOB Razor. Stories of the ambush in Syria, of the intelligence analyst who had revealed herself as one of the military's most capable snipers, spread through special operations communities worldwide. Maya's legend was growing, but it was growing in the right way, focused on professional competence, tactical excellence, and the kind of quiet courage that inspired others to serve at higher levels. 6 months after the Syria ambush, Maya received orders that surprised no one who knew her story. She was being assigned to the Special Operations Training Academy as Chief Instructor for Advanced Marksmanship, a position that would allow her to share her knowledge with the next generation of elite operators. On her final day at FOB Razor, the base formation was larger than usual. Word had spread that Ghost was departing, and personnel from across the installation came to pay their respects to someone who had become a symbol of excellence, humility, and dedication to mission success. Maya stood before the formation in her standard uniform, the same quiet professionalism that had characterized her time at Razor. But now everyone knew who she really was, what she represented, and why her service mattered in ways that went far beyond individual operations. Colonel Rodriguez presented her with a commendation that cited her exceptional courage, tactical expertise, and dedication to the protection of coalition forces. But the real recognition came from the formation itself. Hundreds of personnel standing in respectful silence for someone who had embodied the best traditions of military service. As Maya prepared to board the helicopter that would take her to her new assignment, Chief Vasquez approached for a final conversation. "Ma'am," he said, "what you taught us. It's not just about shooting. It's about paying attention, about not making assumptions, about understanding that competence and courage come in many forms." Maya nodded, understanding that the lessons from Syria extended far beyond marksmanship and tactical techniques. "Chief, the most important thing I can leave you with is this. Never underestimate the quiet professionals, the people who do their jobs without seeking recognition, who serve without expecting praise. Those are often the ones who will save your life when everything goes wrong." The helicopter lifted off into the desert sky, carrying Maya toward a future where she could serve openly, teach freely, and use her gifts to develop the next generation of warriors. Below, FOB Razor continued its mission with a deeper understanding of what true professionalism looked like, and a lasting appreciation for the quiet heroes who served among them. But the legend of Ghost lived on in the stories told around mess halls and training facilities, in the lessons passed from instructor to student, in the understanding that courage doesn't always announce itself with fanfare. Sometimes it sits quietly in intelligence briefings, waiting for the moment when lives hang in the balance and someone needs to step forward and do the impossible. Sometimes it carries a rifle case and works, in shadows until the moment when shadows are no longer enough. Sometimes it saves 180 lives and changes everything, while remaining as humble and professional as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. Real courage rarely seeks the spotlight. It serves quietly, competently, waiting for the moment when everything depends on someone willing to step forward and do what others cannot. Maya Ghost Restrepo spent weeks being overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed. But when 180 Navy SEALs faced annihilation in a Syrian valley, she became exactly who she had always been: a guardian, a warrior, a professional who understood that service means putting mission and lives above personal recognition. Her story reminds us that heroism often wears ordinary uniforms, speaks with quiet voices, and works in roles that seem unremarkable until the moment when everything changes. The best among us don't seek glory. They seek excellence. They don't demand respect. They earn it. And they don't wait for perfect conditions to do the right thing. They do it when it matters most, when lives hang in the balance, when someone has to stand between good people and harm. Some legends are born in a single moment of extraordinary action. Others are built through years of quiet service, revealed only when crisis demands the full measure of who they really are. Maya Ghost Restrepo was both. And her legacy lives on in every operator who learned to look beyond assumptions, in every mission planned with deeper wisdom, in every life saved by someone who understood that true strength serves others before itself. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where you are watching from and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.